Hello everyone, and welcome. Tonight, we travel far away from the noise of the world to a quiet valley where morning arrives slowly, where mist rests over the fields like a soft veil, and where a small medieval village waits beneath the pale light of dawn. There is nothing you need to do now, nothing you need to hold on to. Only listen and allow the story to unfold one calm moment at a time. At the center of the village stands an old stone tower. It rises above the rooftops, older than the houses around it, older than the narrow streets, older perhaps than the names of the families who live beneath its shadow. Its stones are worn by many years of rain and wind. Moss rests between the cracks. Small birds sometimes sit along its ledges when the morning is warm. But at this hour, before the village fully wakes, the tower stands alone in stillness. Within its open arches hang the bells. There are 3 of them, each darkened by time, each shaped by hands long gone. In daylight, they appear ordinary enough, though no villager can remember hearing them ring in the usual way. The bells do not call the hour. They do not announce weddings or funerals. They do not sound across the valley during storms. And yet, everyone in the village knows the same thing. Sometimes, especially in the first light of morning, the bells begin to move. Not with sound, never with sound. The dawn comes quietly. A pale silver glow spreads behind the distant hills, slowly lifting the darkness away from the fields. The roofs of the village begin to emerge from shadow. Thin trails of mist drift between fences and gardens. The nearby lake reflects the dim sky without a ripple. Even the air seems to hold its breath. No one is outside yet. No doors are open. No footsteps disturb the square. Only the tower is there, resting at the center of the sleeping village. As the light grows, the bells remain still for a long while, so still that they seem carved into the silence itself. Their edges hold the faintest line of morning light. Their shadows rest across the inner stone of the tower. And then, so gently that it is almost impossible to be certain, one of them shifts. Not much, only a small movement, a slow, careful tilt, as if touched by something too soft to be called wind. The trees do not move. The grass does not bend. The mist continues to hover in place. And yet the bell moves again. There is no ringing, no vibration in the air, no echo passing through the valley. But the square below feels different, as though the silence itself has changed shape. The movement is so quiet that the eye almost doubts it. Still, it is there. The second bell shifts next, then the third. Not together, not in rhythm, but slowly, with a strange patience, as if each one is waking in its own time. The village remains silent. Still no one appears. Still no bird sings. Still the lake holds the sky in perfect stillness. But around the tower, something subtle has begun. The air feels slightly fuller now, as if a sound exists somewhere beneath hearing. Not heard, not even sensed clearly, only hinted at. A rhythm too quiet for the ear, yet present enough to settle into the stones of the square. If anyone had been awake to witness it, they might have struggled to explain what had changed. The bells had not rung. The village had not stirred. Nothing had happened in any ordinary sense. And yet the dawn no longer felt empty, felt watched, held, as though the old tower was not merely standing at the center of the village, but listening to something far below the reach of sound. The light continues to grow. The valley becomes clearer. The rooftops warm very slightly under the rising day. And above the silent square, the bells remain in motion, slow, soundless, and patient, as if they have been waiting all night for the first light to return. Morning settles more fully over the village, though everything still feels wrapped in the hush of early dawn. The mist has not yet lifted from the narrow paths, and the fields beyond the houses remain pale and quiet beneath a colorless sky. Nothing in the valley rushes. Nothing announces the day. It arrives gently, without urgency, without demand. The old tower remains at the center. Its shadow is long and soft, stretching across the square toward the nearest well and the low stone walls beyond it. The bells still hang inside its open arches, and though their movement has quieted, they do not seem fully at rest. Each one leans almost imperceptibly away from where it should be, as if the memory of movement still holds them. The village around the tower remains still. Wooden shutters are closed. Market tables remain folded against the wall of the granary. A cart stands beside a fence exactly where it was left the evening before. A bucket sits near the well, catching the pale light along its rim. Nothing changes, and yet the tower no longer feels like part of the silence. It feels like the source of it. There is something about the way it stands in the square now. Not larger than before, not darker, not brighter, not altered in any visible way. And still, it has taken on a presence that the houses do not share. The homes of the villagers seem to rest in the morning. The tower does not rest. It waits. The bells remain suspended in their arches, but the space around them feels watchful, as if the openings of the tower are not empty at all, but turned outward, looking across the paths, looking over the rooftops, looking toward the lake where the water lies perfectly flat beneath the whitening sky. A small bird lands briefly on the edge of the tower. It does not sing. It does not hop from stone to stone as birds usually do. It only stands there, still and narrow against the pale sky, as if listening to something the air refuses to carry. After a few moments, it lifts away again and disappears toward the trees. The square remains empty. No footsteps sound from any doorway. No dogs wander into the open. No smoke rises from chimneys yet. Even the ordinary signs of waking life seem delayed, as though the whole village is listening in its sleep. Within the tower, one of the bells shifts again. The motion is small, a careful tilt, then stillness. Another follows, though this time more slowly, almost thoughtfully. There is no wind, no creak of rope, no metal sound against the frame, but the square below seems to tighten with the motion, as if each silent swing presses gently against the morning and leaves an invisible mark there. The tower does not look alive, nothing so dramatic, and yet it no longer seems built only of stone. Its presence fills the square in a way the eye cannot explain. It is not movement, it is not sound, it is something quieter than both, a form of attention, calm awareness, the sense that the tower is not merely standing in the village but observing it, holding it, waiting for something within it to answer. The light grows stronger at the edge of the valley. The roofs begin to take on a warmer tone. The wet grass near the well glimmers faintly. The mist thins enough to reveal the first garden paths between the houses. Still, no villager appears, and because no one is there to break the stillness, the tower's strange presence becomes easier to feel. The bells do not ring, but the square seems arranged around them. The houses face inward. The paths lead toward them. The well sits below them. Everything in the village seems quietly gathered around the old stone tower, as though it has always been the center not just of the square, but of something deeper. The morning has now fully entered the village, though it has not yet disturbed its calm. Light rests over the rooftops in pale gold. The mist lingers only in the narrower lanes where the stone stays cool. The lake beyond the square remains smooth and gray-blue, almost merging with the sky. Nothing in the valley moves with haste. At the center of it all, the tower watches. The bells have settled again, but their stillness feels different now, as if it is only a pause between motions. The square below lies empty for a little while longer. The bucket remains beside the well. The folded market tables still lean against the granary wall. A broom rests on the step of a nearby doorway, left there from the day before. Then, at last, a door opens. Not suddenly, not with noise, only a careful inward movement of wood and shadow. From one of the houses facing the square, a villager steps outside. The figure is wrapped in a simple wool cloak against the cool air of morning. No hurried purpose guides the movement. The villager pauses in the doorway first, looking out across the square as if checking the shape of the day. The tower stands directly ahead. The bells hang within their arches. The light touches the stone and softens its rough surface. The villager takes one step forward. No sound follows. The boot meets the stone path, but the usual small scuff of leather against dust does not come. The silence remains unbroken. It is not that the step is quiet. It is that the step does not seem to produce sound at all. The villager pauses again. Another step. Again, nothing. No echo from the square. No scrape of sole. No shifting of gravel. The figure continues toward the well, moving slowly, perhaps not yet aware that anything is unusual. The hands are folded together against the cool air. The head remains slightly bowed, as though still carrying the last softness of sleep. And yet something has changed the moment the first step entered the square. The silence no longer belongs only to the village. It now belongs to the movement within it. The tower seems more awake because of it. The bells do not move, but they appear to lean toward the square. The stone arches hold the light in long, pale bands. The village remains calm, but the calm has become attentive. The villager reaches the well and rests one hand upon its edge. Still no sound. The bucket is lifted. No clink of metal. No hollow knock against stone. The rope is drawn upward. No fibers strain. No pulley turns with its usual dry complaint. Everything happens exactly as it should, and yet the morning absorbs each action completely, leaving only the sight of movement behind. The villager finally lifts their head and looks toward the tower. Perhaps it is the same feeling that has rested over the square since dawn. Perhaps it is simply the strange silence of their own footsteps. Whatever the reason, the gaze rises and stays there. The bells hang motionless for a moment. Then one shifts. The movement is slight but unmistakable. The villager does not flinch, does not call out, only watches. Another bell tilts after it. Then the third. No ringing follows, but the space around the tower changes once more, growing fuller, denser, as though an invisible rhythm has begun to press outward into the square. The villager's hand remains on the well rope. The bucket hangs halfway raised. Everything seems to wait. A second door opens somewhere beyond the square. Another villager appears, then stops at once, as if sensing that this morning does not belong to ordinary routine. No voices are exchanged. No greeting passes between them. The first villager takes a single step away from the well. Again, no sound. This time, the absence is impossible to ignore. The movement of the body is natural. The step is real. By now, the village is no longer asleep, yet it has not fully awakened either. A few more doors stand half open. A shutter has been drawn back above the square. Two villagers watch from separate thresholds, neither stepping fully into the morning. The first villager remains near the well, still looking upward. The second lingers in the doorway across the square. No one speaks. It is not fear that holds them. It is attention. The old tower stands unchanged in the growing light. Its rough stones show every crack and pale line. Moss clings to the lower side where morning dampness settles longest. The arches near the top are shadowed within, though the outer edges now glow with the low sun. The bells hang there like dark fruit from some ancient branch, and still there is no wind. The flags above the granary are motionless. The leaves on the fig tree beside the wall do not tremble. The surface of the lake remains smooth, carrying only the faint mirrored outline of the tower. The valley itself seems to have entered the silence so completely that even the thought of a breeze feels distant. And yet the largest bell moves, slowly at first. Its body tilts by the smallest degree, then returns halfway, then leans further than before. The thick rope beside it remains almost straight, not pulled, not swaying. Nothing touches it. No visible force acts upon it. The first villager straightens. One hand still rests lightly against the stone edge of the well, but the body is now fully alert. Another villager emerges into the square, then stops beside the broom on the steps. Across the village, a window opens and someone looks out. No one speaks. If they did, perhaps the voice would also vanish into the strange silence. Perhaps words would fall flat against the stones and disappear as footsteps have done. No one seems willing to test it. The bell moves further. The motion is not hurried. It is not violent. If anything, it is careful, as though the bell itself is learning the limits of the morning. It swings outward just enough to suggest the beginning of a ring. But no sound follows, not even the faint metallic breath that ought to come before impact. The second bell begins to move next, not in answer, not in harmony, only as if it too has decided to wake. The third remains still for a time, its dark lip resting in shadow. Then, very gently, it joins the others. Now all three are in motion. And because the air remains perfectly calm, the sight becomes almost impossible to bear in ordinary terms. The mind searches for explanation and finds none. The ropes are untouched, the wind absent, the tower stone still. But above the square the bells swing in slow, soundless arcs, each one cutting through the pale morning with a motion that should fill the valley and yet leaves not a whisper behind. The silence deepens. It no longer feels like the absence of noise. It feels active, almost shaped, as if the bells are ringing not into the air but into the silence itself, pressing invisible circles outward through the village. The first villager takes a careful step backward from the well. No sound. Another villager crosses the threshold of a doorway. No sound. A child appears beside an upper window. By the time the sun climbs above the eastern hill, the square is no longer empty. A handful of villagers now stand at the edges of the open space, each held at a careful distance from the tower, as though some shared instinct has drawn a quiet boundary around it. No one crosses the center. No one touches the well rope again. Even the children who have come to the windows lean out only a little, as if unwilling to bring their small bodies too fully into the silence. The bells remain still for a while. That stillness ought to be reassuring. Instead, it makes the square feel even more watchful. The morning light grows clearer, falling across the stones in pale gold. The shape of the tower's shadow shortens and turns. Ordinarily, its dark form would rest cleanly across the square, a simple mark of the rising sun. But now it appears changed, not larger, not darker, only less stable. At first, it is difficult to notice. The villagers stand so quietly that the eye is drawn upward, always returning to the bells. Yet on the ground below, where the shadow of the bell chamber falls over the old paving stones, something begins to tremble. Not the stones, not the light, the shadow itself. It shifts by the smallest degree, a movement too delicate to be blamed on the sun's slow climb. One narrow band of darkness along the edge of the tower's outline leans outward, then returns, as if stirred by the same invisible motion that touches the bells. A woman near the granary notices first. Her head tilts slightly. The first villager by the well follows her gaze downward. Others soon see it too. The shadow is moving. The bells above remain still. No wind crosses the square, and yet the shadow of the bell chamber sways slowly over the stones below, casting no sound, leaving no dust disturbed in its wake. The motion is almost graceful. It resembles the path a ringing bell's vibration might take if sound were somehow translated into darkness instead of air. No one speaks. One child at the window withdraws from sight. Another villager takes a step closer, but stops before reaching the edge of the tower's shadow. The silence now feels denser there, as though the dark shape on the ground gathers and holds what the bells do not release. The shadow moves again, this time more clearly. A long arc glides over the stones and pauses. Then another arc answers it from the opposite side, not in exactly the same place, but with the same slow intention. It is not random. It is not the ordinary shifting of morning light. It has rhythm, a silent ringing rhythm, the kind one might feel in the chest after a bell sounds across a valley and the echo lives there for a few extra moments. Except here there is no sound at all, only the visible pulse of darkness moving where sound should be. The villagers continue to watch. One of them places a palm against the nearest wall as if grounding themselves. Another closes their eyes briefly, perhaps to test whether whatever is happening can be sensed more clearly without sight. When the eyes open again, the shadow still moves. The tower remains upright and calm. The bells hang unmoving in their frame, but on the ground below, the shadow rings. By now, the whole village knows something is happening, though no message has been carried and no bell has called them. More doors stand open than closed. Faces appear in upper windows and along narrow lanes. The baker has come to the corner of the square with flour still dusting one sleeve. An old man leans on a walking stick near the wall of the chapel. Two sisters stand beneath an apple tree with their shawls gathered tightly around them, not from cold but from uncertainty. No one raises a voice. No one asks what the others have seen. It is as if the silence itself has made speaking unnecessary. The tower remains the center of every gaze. The bells are still again. The shadow rests where it should. The square looks ordinary at a distance, almost beautiful in the clean light of morning. Yet the air around it feels tuned, as though some invisible thread has been drawn across the village and tightened just enough for everyone to feel its pull. People do not listen with their ears now. They listen with their stillness. The first villager who stepped into the square at dawn stands nearest the well, posture calm but fully attentive. Others hold themselves in a similar way, shoulders relaxed, hands still, heads lifted only slightly. No one pushes forward. No one withdraws. The village has entered a kind of shared waiting. A woman in the doorway of the smithy closes her eyes, not in fear, only to sense more clearly. A boy who had been hiding behind a rain barrel steps into the lane, then stops and presses one hand against his chest, mirroring the earlier gesture of the villager by the well. Across the square, the old man with the walking stick nods almost imperceptibly, as if recognizing that same feeling in himself. There is a rhythm here now, still not heard, but unmistakable. It moves through the village the way warmth moves through stone after sunrise. Subtle, gradual, impossible to see directly and yet undeniable once it is there. Every few moments the silence deepens, then softens, deepens, then softens again. It comes from the tower, though not in any ordinary way. The bells do not swing. The ropes do not stir. Yet the villagers feel the intervals between invisible rings. The lake beyond the square has begun to respond as well. Its surface remains mostly smooth, but the smallest lines appear near the shore. Fine ripples that do not spread outward from any object, only gather and fade in place, as if the water is listening too. A rooster in a distant yard lifts its head but does not crow. Even the animals seem held in the same listening hush. The square no longer belongs to daily routine. No one reaches for the bucket. No one unfolds the market tables. Bread remains inside ovens. Laundry remains on its line. All ordinary tasks have paused without command. The village is listening together now, each person gathering inward, each movement slowed by the strange sense that something meaningful is arriving without language. Then one of the bells tilts again. Every eye lifts. It is only a slight movement, but across the square bodies respond to it at once. Not by stepping back or gasping, but by becoming even more still. The second bell follows. Then the third. Their soundless motion does not disturb the air, and yet the silent rhythm in the village strengthens immediately, pressing softly against skin, chest, and bone. A child smiles without knowing why. A woman wipes tears from one cheek, though she does not appear sad. The old man with the walking stick closes his fingers around the worn wood and breathes out very slowly. Whatever this ringing is, it is no longer strange only in the mind. It has entered the body. The bells move slowly above the square, and the village listens more deeply than before. By now, the absence of sound is no longer surprising. It has become the very shape of what is happening. The silent ringing does not imitate noise. It creates its own kind of presence, one that settles into the spaces between heartbeats and seems to draw each villager inward. The morning continues to brighten, but it does not become ordinary again. Sunlight warms the stones. The mist has nearly left the lanes. Smoke finally rises from one chimney near the baker's house, then another near the far wall. Yet even these ordinary signs of waking life feel softened, as though taking place within a world that now obeys another rhythm. The bells swing gently, no clapper sounds inside them, and still there is something like a tone, not heard, not even exactly felt, more like a shape passing through the body, a round, patient wave that arrives and fades without ever entering the ear. It touches the villagers in different ways. Some lower their eyes when it passes. Some lift their faces toward the tower. One young mother presses her hand to the shoulder of the child beside her. The old man with the walking stick smiles faintly, as though the silent tone reminds him of something he once knew and almost forgot. The square remains quiet, but now the silence has texture. The first villager near the well senses it most clearly. With each slow arc of the bells, the chest seems to fill and empty in time with something larger. Not breathing exactly, not the body's own motion. Something wider, deeper, held beyond the ordinary scale of the morning. The villager closes their eyes for a moment and finds that the silent tone grows stronger in darkness, as if vision itself had been the only thing keeping it at a distance. When the eyes open again, the world is unchanged. The tower stands. The bells move. The villagers wait. And the soundless sound continues. Near the granary wall, one of the sisters takes a small step forward and rests her palm lightly against the stone. She seems not to test its temperature, but its vibration. Perhaps she expects the silent ringing to live there too. Perhaps it does. Her hand stays where it is. She does not withdraw. The dog in the lane rises and takes 3 careful steps toward the square, then lies down again, as if the invisible tone has touched it as well. The nearby fig leaves remain motionless, yet the air feels full, no longer empty space but something gently occupied. Then the largest bell slows. The others continue. For a moment, the rhythm separates. One silent wave fades while another arrives. The villagers notice at once. Heads tilt, shoulders shift. The silent sound becomes layered, not louder, not stronger, but more intricate. It is no longer one unseen ringing but several, overlapping in a pattern too soft for reason and too present to ignore. The lake reflects the tower with unusual clarity. On its surface, the shape of the bell chamber trembles even though the water remains mostly still. The reflection does not behave as it should. It seems to deepen with each invisible tone, drawing the eye downward as though the soundless ringing has found a second home beneath the water. No one mentions it. No one needs to. The village is listening now with every part of itself, and the tower seems to know it. The bells continue their arcs, patient and unhurried. The silent sound passes again, and this time a woman near the chapel lets out a long breath as if released from some old burden. A child who had been restless becomes suddenly calm. The baker lowers both flour-covered hands and simply stands still. The bells continue in their measured silence until the whole village seems gathered around them in one shared hush. No latecomer enters the square with confusion anymore. Those who arrive take their place at the edge and become still at once, as if the nature of the morning can be understood in a single glance. The tower at the center no longer appears merely old. It appears awake. The light has risen enough now to reveal every detail of the stone. Lichen, cracks, weathered seams, places where repairs were made long ago with a slightly paler mortar. The tower should feel solid and certain, anchored by age. And yet, the longer the villagers watch, the more they sense another movement hidden within it. It begins so faintly that it might be dismissed as imagination. The lower stone courses, half in shadow, seem to draw inward by the smallest degree, then relax. No crack shifts, no dust falls, no actual change in structure can be named, and still the impression remains. The tower has taken a breath. The bells above pause between their soundless motions. A silent tone passes through the square. The stones of the tower seem to settle outward once more, not bulging, not bending, but softening and returning in a slow rhythm too subtle for ordinary sight and too persistent to ignore. The first villager near the well notices it clearly enough to lower the gaze from the bells to the stone body beneath them. Others follow. What had seemed impossible becomes unmistakable once seen together. The whole tower is participating in the same invisible rhythm as the bells. It breathes, not like an animal, not like a living thing in any familiar way, but like a place remembering motion after many years of stillness. Inhale, a near-invisible gathering inward, as if silence itself were being drawn into the stones. Exhale, a slow release that expands not air but presence, pressing the quiet further into the square and lanes beyond. The villagers do not recoil. If anything, they become calmer. Several close their eyes, perhaps to feel the rhythm more clearly. One child mirrors the motion unconsciously, breathing more slowly. The old man with the walking stick leans less heavily upon it now, as if the tower's breath has given strength rather than taken it away. The bells move again above. With each arc, the tower breathes. The two rhythms are not separate. The villagers sense that at once. The soundless ringing and the stone breath belong to one another. When the bells slow, the tower's breathing softens. When the bells tilt more deeply, the stone gathers and releases with greater clarity. No wind enters the square, no bird calls, and yet the morning feels fuller than any market day. At the edge of the square, a loaf of bread slips from the baker's basket and lands on the stones. No sound. The baker looks down but does not bend to pick it up. Even that small, ordinary impulse must wait. The village has surrendered itself to the tower's strange rhythm, and in doing so has become part of it. The lake beyond the houses responds as well. The reflection of the tower no longer stands perfectly rigid in the water. It narrows and widens by the faintest degree, as if the breath moving through stone reaches all the way to the shore. The square, the paths, the lake, the gathered villagers. Everything seems caught in the same patient inhale and exhale. The tower breathes again. Inward, outward. The bells answer. No sound follows, but the silence has become living, shaped, rhythmic, impossible to mistake for emptiness now. The villagers stand within it as one might say. By mid-morning, the village has given up all attempt to return to ordinary tasks. Bread remains half-baked. Water remains in the well. Goats wait unmilked in shaded pens. The market has not opened. No one has decided this aloud, but everyone understands that the day now belongs to the tower. The bells continue their quiet arcs. The tower its slow breathing. The villagers have become so attuned to the invisible rhythm that small changes within it now matter deeply. They can feel when one bell moves before another. They can sense when the tower's stone gathers more strongly inward before a release. Though nothing is heard, the silent ringing has grown as expressive as music. Then the smallest bell changes. It had been the stillest of the three all morning, moving only when the larger bells drew it into motion. But now, while the others hang nearly at rest, the small bell tilts alone, not outward, not in any random direction. It turns toward the square. The movement is slight, yet so deliberate that several villagers straighten at once. The bell's mouth seems almost angled toward the first villager near the well. Then, slowly, it shifts toward the baker by the granary wall. Then toward the old man with the walking stick. Not far, not fast, but enough to suggest attention. The bell is looking. The thought enters the square like a silent breeze. No one says it, but the villagers feel it gather among them. The bell does not merely move, it regards. Its slow tilt from one witness to another carries the unmistakable weight of recognition. A child in the upper window draws back behind the curtain, then peeks out again. The small bell angles upward, almost toward the child's gaze. At once the child presses both palms against the sill and smiles with a look not of amusement but of wonder, as if having been noticed by something impossibly old and patient. The larger bells remain mostly still. The tower breathes only faintly now. All attention has shifted to the smallest bell and its impossible awareness. The first villager by the well takes one silent step into the open center of the square. Again, no sound from the stones. The bell turns toward that movement immediately. A murmur would have passed among the villagers in any other circumstance. But today, even astonishment has learned to remain quiet. The square deepens into listening once more. The small bell leans another fraction, holding the villager in its invisible regard. Then it slowly returns to center. The villagers wait. The bell does not move. A woman near the chapel lifts one hand slightly, almost as a test. The bell turns toward her. No mistake now. No chance movement. No hidden wind. It knows where attention gathers, where movement begins, where presence shifts. It follows awareness itself. The lake catches the scene in reflection, and there too the small bell seems oddly alive, its shadowed shape brighter than it should be in the water. The still surface makes its motions appear even more precise. The bell does not swing like a pendulum. It inclines like a listener. The tower breathes again, inward, outward. This time the villagers feel not only the usual silent rhythm, but another layer beneath it, something closer to recognition. The same feeling one has upon entering a familiar room after many years away and realizing the room remembers you too. The first villager raises a hand very slowly, palm open toward the tower. The small bell turns and holds there. For several heartbeats, nothing else moves. The bell, the hand, the square, the gathered villagers all remain within one still point of mutual awareness. The square has narrowed in feeling, though not in size. The edges remain where they have always been. The well, the chapel wall, the granary steps, the lanes that lead out toward gardens and fields. But everyone senses a deeper center now, drawn not only by the tower itself but by the smallest bell that has begun to choose where it looks. The first villager still stands nearest that center. There is nothing remarkable about the figure at first glance. A plain cloak, work-worn hands, a face made gentle by years of ordinary village life. And perhaps that is why the moment feels possible. The tower has not called for the oldest, the youngest, the strongest, or the wisest. It has turned toward someone ordinary, someone who stepped first into the silent square before knowing it had changed. The small bell angles toward the villager again. The gesture is patient, clear, an invitation or something like one. The villagers around the edges of the square remain still, but their attention gathers so completely that even the morning light feels concentrated. The tower breathes. The bells hold. The dog in the lane lifts its head. The lake reflects the entire scene with such precision that it seems another village waits below the water, watching in equal silence. The first villager looks up at the rope hanging from the smallest bell. It dangles lower than the others, frayed at the end, dark with age. No one can remember the last time it was touched. The bell has never been rung in living memory. No one has had reason to try. The villager begins to walk toward it. One silent step, then another. The movement is calm, unforced, as though some inner certainty has replaced uncertainty entirely. No voice from the crowd calls them back. No elder warns against it. The village seems to understand that this too belongs to the morning and must unfold without interruption. The tower's breathing deepens as the villager approaches. The bells above remain mostly still. The smallest holds its attention downward. At the foot of the tower, the villager stops and looks up once more. The rope hangs within reach if the arm is raised. Morning light spills along the stone wall. Moss darkens the lower cracks. Everything appears utterly ordinary except for the density of the silence and the strange sense that the whole village has been brought to this exact point. The villager lifts a hand. Slowly, the fingers hover near the rope but do not yet touch it. The square seems to pause within itself. Even the invisible rhythm from the bells becomes momentarily faint, as though waiting for the contact before continuing. Then the fingers close around the frayed rope. There is no shock, no flash, no tremor of stone. The rope feels real, rough, ordinary. And yet, at the moment of touch, the silent ringing returns in a deeper form than before. The villagers feel it pass through them all at once, not as force but as recognition. The tower breathes inward. The smallest bell tilts. The rope tightens slightly in the villager's hand. The villager does not pull. Not yet. Stillness holds. Then, with the gentlest possible motion, the hand draws the rope a little closer. The smallest bell swings. No sound fills the air, but the silence changes completely. It rounds outward from the tower like a wave made of calm, passes through the square and into the lanes, over the rooftops and toward the lake. The villagers all feel it. Several close their eyes. One child laughs silently, overcome not by humor but by wonder. The old man with the walking stick lowers his head as if in prayer. The first contact has been made, not between hand and rope only, between villager and the villager remains at the foot of the tower with one hand resting around the frayed rope. For a few still moments after the first contact, nothing appears to change. The bell above settles. The tower breathes faintly. The villagers hold their places around the square. Morning light lies evenly across the stones. Then the rope tightens, not by the villager's hand. The fingers do not pull. The wrist does not move. And yet the rope grows gently taut, as though some patient force has taken hold of it from within the bell itself. The villager notices at once. So do the others. A deeper quiet passes across the square, one that makes even the earlier silence seem thin by comparison. The rope lifts slightly. The hand follows because it must. Not dragged, not forced, only guided. The motion is so calm that it carries no violence, no threat. It feels instead like being included in something that had already begun before anyone arrived in the square. The villager loosens the grip at once, perhaps from surprise, perhaps from trust. The fingers open. The rope does not fall, continues moving alone. A woman near the chapel presses one hand to her mouth. The baker takes one silent step forward. The dog in the lane rises onto its feet again but does not enter the square. Every eye remains fixed on the slow upward pull of the rope, the way it rises and slackens again, with no visible hand above and no wind to explain it. The smallest bell answers. It swings in a wider arc than before. No sound fills the morning, but the village receives the motion as surely as if a bell tone had rolled over the valley. The silent wave passes through chest and bone. Several villagers close their eyes. The old man with the walking stick exhales slowly and nods once, as though the motion has confirmed something long suspected. The rope continues. It does not jerk or strain. Its movement is measured, almost ceremonial. Each lift invites a swing from the bell above. Each release allows the bell to return. The rhythm is steady now, and the tower's breathing begins to follow it more visibly. Inward, the rope tightens. Outward, the bell swings. The square receives the silent ringing. The first villager steps back from the tower, leaving the rope hanging freely before them. No one attempts to grasp it again. No one dares to interrupt the strange, patient motion. The contact has already been made, and now the rope seems to remember the hand without needing it. It rises again. The bell answers again. The villagers feel the invisible rhythm with greater clarity than ever before. It is no longer only a tone without sound. It has become a pulse shared by everyone in the square. A rhythm that belongs equally to rope, bell, tower, lake, and body. A child near an upper window mirrors the motion unconsciously, lifting and lowering one hand in time with the rope. A woman by the granary closes her eyes and sways slightly, not from dizziness but from alignment, as though the silent ringing has found the pace of her own breathing. Even the lake beyond the village edge begins to show the faintest repeated trembling along its shore, a pattern too regular to be wind and too soft to be wave. The rope moves again. No one touches it. No one commands it. And yet it seems entirely right that it should continue. The villagers no longer experience the motion as impossibility. They experience it as revelation. What had once seemed extraordinary now feels deeply, strangely natural. As if the bell and rope have only... The rope continues its calm and patient motion, and the smallest bell now swings with a confidence that was absent before. The villagers watch in complete stillness. Morning has brightened into full day, and yet the village remains gathered in the square as if no hour beyond this one exists. The smallest bell completes another arc. This time it does not stop at the modest measure of earlier movements. It swings farther, slower, more fully. The body of the bell turns through the open air beneath the stone arch. Its dark mouth points toward the square, then away, then back again. It rings, silently. For the first time, the villagers know with absolute certainty that what they are witnessing is not merely motion. It is a full ringing, complete in every way except the one the ear expects. The bell swings in the shape of sound, in the rhythm of sound, in the consequence of sound. Yet no metal voice enters the air. Instead, something deeper spreads. The silent ring moves through the village like a widening circle made not of pressure but of presence. Passes through each witness differently. The baker feels it first as warmth in both hands. The old man with the walking stick feels it in his spine, straightening him gently. The child at the window feels it as sudden peace and rests both arms on the sill without fidgeting. The first villager near the tower closes the eyes and receives it as a great calm entering the chest. The bell swings again. The silent ring returns. And this time the two larger bells begin to answer. Not together, not perfectly, but with unmistakable response. The middle bell tilts and enters its own slow arc. The largest follows with grave patience. Soon all three are moving, each in a slightly different measure, overlapping their silent rings until the whole square seems layered with unheard music. The tower breathes more deeply now. The shadow at its base pulses with each arc. The lake responds at once. The water does not break into waves, but the reflection of the tower thickens and thins with the silent ringing, as if the image itself is receiving the tones. The bell chamber below the surface appears more awake than the one above it. The villagers who turn toward the lake feel the same music there, more concentrated, more inward. No one speaks. At this point, speech would seem smaller than what is happening. Words belong to ordinary time, ordinary mornings, ordinary bells. But the silent ringing has drawn the whole village into something older and gentler than speech. Even astonishment now feels calm. The bells continue. The smallest leads. The others answer. The square receives every arc as if the stone beneath it were a body and the bells its hidden heart. A young mother gathers her child close, not protectively, but tenderly, as though sharing the motion between them. A man by the chapel wall lowers himself to sit upon the step because his legs no longer seem to belong entirely to him. The silent ringing has entered too deeply for ordinary posture, and still the air remains empty of sound. No birds fly away, no animals startle, no echo passes over the valley. Yet the village hears the bells with total clarity, not through ears, through memory, through stillness, through the quiet places within the body that ordinary noise never reaches. The smallest bell swings once more, completing its fullest arc yet. The invisible music rounds outward, through alleys and gardens, over roofs and fences, down to the lake and up the slope beyond it. It does not weaken with distance. It only becomes softer, wider, more complete. The villagers remain gathered in the square. The ringing continues without sound, and because it continues, it begins to do what all true music eventually does. It changes the listener. No dramatic sign announces this change. No villager cries out. No face takes on an expression of alarm or wonder great enough to break the mourning. The transformation is quieter than that, happening beneath gesture, beneath thought, beneath the ordinary sense of self that each person carried into the square. The first villager feels it most clearly. Standing nearest the tower, no longer touching the rope, the figure remains perfectly still. The shoulders have lowered. The breathing has slowed. The eyes stay open, but their focus has softened, not from weariness, but from a new kind of attention. The silent ringing no longer seems to pass through the body from outside. It now feels as though it is moving from within. Others begin to notice. The baker's hands, once tense at the wrists, relax completely. The woman by the granary no longer clutches her shawl. The old man with the walking stick stands without leaning on it at all. One child, who had been peering from the window, now rests the cheek against the frame and watches with deep, untroubled calm. The bell's silence is not emptying them. It is rearranging them. The tower breathes. The bells move, and the villagers, little by little, begin to match that rhythm. No one chooses this. No one tries. It simply occurs. Inhale as the tower gathers inward. Release as the bells complete their slow arcs. Within a short time, the square holds not dozens of separate bodies, but one shared tempo. The villagers do not lose themselves. Instead, they become more fully themselves and yet less divided from one another. The silent ringing has entered the spaces where worry normally lives and found them unnecessary. The first villager lifts one hand slightly, not toward the tower this time, but toward the chest, as if noticing something there. The movement is slow, thoughtful. No fear accompanies it. Whatever has changed feels older than fear. The silent ring passes again. The hand lowers. The face softens further. It is as if the bell has touched not skin, not bone, but memory. Not memory of a specific day or person. A deeper memory, the kind that exists before language and remains after words are gone. The memory of belonging, of being held, of standing in a world where nothing needs to be defended for a moment because everything is already in quiet relation to everything else. The villagers all receive some form of this. A woman near the chapel smiles faintly through tears that do not seem sorrowful. A young man who had arrived at the edge of the square with furrowed brow now rests both hands peacefully at his sides. The dog in the lane closes its eyes and lies with its head on its paws. Even the air feels changed. Not thicker, not lighter, simply more inward, more near. The bells continue to ring without sound. And with every arc, the inward changes deepen. Thoughts slow, bodies soften, breath aligns. The village is not being taken over by the ringing. It is being reminded by it. Reminded of some forgotten stillness beneath all task, all worry, all speech. A place within that has always listened better than the ear. The first villager near the tower now appears almost luminous in ordinary daylight. Not glowing, not visibly transformed, but present with unusual clarity. The face seems more itself, the posture more exact. The silence around the figure more settled than anywhere else in the square. The rope moves. The silent ringing continues through the morning, and by now the whole square seems to exist under a different law than the rest of the world. Not a dramatic law, nothing sharp or violent. Rather something gentler, more difficult to notice at first and impossible to ignore once seen. The square itself has begun to change. The well remains where it has always stood. The granary wall catches the same warm light. The chapel steps keep their familiar worn edges. And still, none of these things feel entirely fixed anymore. The stone underfoot has not become liquid, yet it no longer feels wholly solid either. Each paving stone seems to hold more depth than before, as if the silence has entered the ground and loosened the certainty of shape. The edges of shadows soften first. What had once been clear dark lines beneath the wall, the cart, the well, and the villager's feet now begins to blur. Not vanish, only lose sharpness. The tower's long outline on the square is still visible, but it no longer appears separate from the stones it covers. Light and shadow begin to resemble each other more closely, not in color, but in texture. Both seem to belong to the same silent surface. The villagers notice. No one reacts with surprise. The village has moved beyond surprise. Instead, they receive the shifting square with the same deep attention they have given the bells. A few glance down at their feet. One child leans farther from the window to study how the light now rests across the well. The old man with the walking stick looks along the tower's shadow and smiles faintly, as though recognizing something familiar in the change. The bells continue their arcs. The tower breathes. With each silent ring, the square seems to soften another degree. The distances between objects feel slightly altered. The well does not move closer to the chapel, and yet the space between them seems easier, less fixed, less measured. The lane that leads toward the lake appears longer when looked at directly and shorter when noticed from the corner of the eye. The first villager stands near the center, calm within it all. Now and then the figure lowers the gaze to the stones below, as if listening through the feet. Perhaps that is possible now. The square no longer carries the village merely on its surface. It seems to be holding the invisible ringing, storing it in the spaces between stone and dust. A woman near the granary takes one silent step from shadow into sunlight. The transition is almost imperceptible, not because the light is dim, but because shadow and sunlight no longer feel opposed. Both belong to the same changed space. Both seem touched by the bells. The lake beyond the houses glimmers faintly through the gap between two roofs. A villager notices it and turns to look. The reflection there has grown stranger, clearer and yet less bound to the ordinary behavior of water. But even without looking toward the lake, everyone in the square can feel that the soft shifting of the world has spread outward from the tower. The village is no longer just watching the event. It has entered it. The square, once a place of market days and passing errands, has become something quieter and deeper. Not a sacred place in the formal sense, not a place set apart by ritual or law. Instead, it has become a shared interior, a space inside the village and somehow also inside the people gathered there. The bells move again. The square softens again. A breeze should have passed by now, given the hour. It does not. The air remains still, yet the world is changing all the same. The villagers understand this without needing to name it. What the bells ring into the village is not sound but relation. They are drawing all things, stone, shadow, breath, memory, into a gentler arrangement. Nothing is lost. Nothing breaks. The square merely becomes more. It is the baker who first turns fully away from the square and looks toward the lake with real attention. Until now, the water had remained part of the scene only at the edge. A pale gleam beyond the roofs, a quiet strip of brightness between gardens and reeds. But as the square softens under the bell's silent rhythm, the pull of the lake becomes impossible to ignore. Several villagers follow the baker's gaze. What they see draws them slowly from the tower's center toward the shore. No one hurries. No one needs to. The bells continue behind them, soundless and patient. The tower breathes in the square. Yet the ringing feels stronger near the lake, as though the water has begun to answer in a language of its own. A few villagers move along the path together, their steps making no sound on the stones or packed earth. The first villager goes with them, not leaving the tower behind so much as carrying its silence outward. Others remain in the square, unwilling to break the circle entirely. The village has become divided between tower and lake, and somehow the two places already feel like parts of the same body. At the shore, the water lies almost perfectly still. No wind stirs it. No bird schemes the surface. The reeds at the edge do not sway. Yet the reflection is more vivid than any reflection ought to be. The tower appears in the lake with unusual depth. The arches seem wider there, the bells darker and more distinct. Even the old stones of the tower look less worn below the surface, as if the water holds not the tower as it is, but the tower more fully itself. The villagers stand quietly and look down. The bells move above, but in the water they seem to move with greater certainty, their arcs smoother, fuller, more complete. The silent ringing is felt more strongly here too. It does not pass through the body as a wave now. It gathers within the chest and lingers there, round and deep. One of the villagers kneels near the shore. The hand extends toward the water but stops short of touching it. Not from fear, from reverence. The reflection feels too awake to disturb. The first villager looks from the real tower to the one in the lake and senses, with strange certainty, that the reflection is not merely following. It is participating, perhaps leading. The silent rhythm seems to form first below, then arrive above. It is impossible to prove, and yet the feeling remains. Another bell arc passes. The water answers, not with ripples, not with sound, but with a subtle deepening of the image. The bell chamber grows darker, richer. The reflection of the smallest bell seems to watch the shore as the real bell watched the square. A child who has followed the adults to the path squeezes the hand of a parent and whispers nothing at all, because there is no need. Every gaze already says the same thing. The lake is listening too, or more than listening, receiving, holding, perhaps even remembering. The village had always treated the lake as a simple companion to daily life, a place for drawing water, washing cloth, mending nets, watching weather gather. But today it reveals another role. It has become a second chamber for the bells, a second square, a second tower, a deeper archive of the same silence. Behind them, the real bells continue their soundless ringing. Before them, the reflected bells answer. The villagers stand between the two, held in a gentle line of attention that joins tower to lake without needing speech or path. The square no longer feels like the center of the village alone. The center has widened. It now includes the shore, the water, and whatever hidden depth allows reflection to become more than image. The first villager kneels at last. No hand touches the water. Stillness remains. But in the lake, the bells, at some quiet point between the square and the shore, the villagers realize that the morning has stopped changing. No one names it first. The recognition moves through them gradually, like the silent ringing itself. A few look toward the sun. Others notice the unchanged angle of the tower's shadow beside the well. One woman glances at the bread basket still resting where it slipped to the stones earlier and understands that far more time should have passed. And yet the day remains suspended. The light is the same. The warmth is the same. The shadow beneath the chapel eaves has not shifted by a finger's width. The mist that should have fully burned away from the far field still lingers in a pale band near the ground. The morning does not move forward. It holds. The bells continue their silent ringing with measured patience. The tower keeps its slow breath. The lake maintains its deep, impossible reflection. Nothing appears frozen. Nothing is rigid or dead. The villagers still breathe. The bells still swing. The water still glimmers. But the ordinary passage from one moment into the next has become strangely unnecessary. The village stands within one long, unbroken dawn. The first villager rises from the kneeling posture by the shore and turns back toward the tower. The motion feels natural, yet beneath it lies the growing certainty that this movement does not belong to time in the old way. Each gesture now seems able to continue without leading anywhere beyond itself. The villagers do not panic. Why should they? Nothing here feels wrong. If anything, it feels more peaceful than any ordinary morning. The usual pressure of hours, tasks, and small necessities has fallen away. No market must open. No bread must be sold before it cools. No child must be hurried toward lessons or chores. The village has entered a moment broad enough to hold all things without asking them to continue. The bells swing. Silence rings. The moment remains. An old woman seated near the chapel closes her eyes and smiles faintly, as if she has waited many years without knowing it for exactly this relief from time. A child near the lake forgets to be restless. The baker, usually so aware of ovens and rising dough, feels no anxiety at all for what has been left unfinished. In this held mourning, unfinished things do not trouble anyone. Everything has become complete in simply being present. The tower's breathing grows more gentle now, as though even it no longer needs to gather and release with the same effort. The square holds. The shore holds. The silent ringing continues. The whole village exists within a spacious pause that has depth but no urgency. The first villager returns slowly to the square. The others follow in their own time, though time no longer feels like the right word. They are not leaving the lake behind. The reflection remains with them somehow, carried inward like a memory that is still occurring. When they reach the square, the tower stands as it did before, and yet it seems less separate from the village than ever. Everything now belongs to the same unmoving morning. A bell completes another arc. The silent wave passes through the square. No one marks it as later than the last. No one counts. No one wonders how long this has been happening. The question has lost meaning. The held moment is not empty. It is full of attention, of calm, of gentle relation. It does not trap the villagers. It releases them from the need to go. The village has accepted the held mourning so fully that even the impossible begins to feel natural. The bells ring in silence. The tower breathes. Time remains suspended in its pale golden place. The villagers stand in the square and along the shore with deep, untroubled attention. Then the lake changes again. At first, the difference is so subtle that only the first villager notices it. Standing between square and shore, the figure glances downward and sees that the reflection does not entirely obey. The real body stands still, arms resting loosely at the sides. But in the water, the reflected right hand has lifted by the smallest degree. The villager looks down more carefully. The real hand remains still. The reflected hand moves again. Not sharply, not in warning, only with a slow, inward certainty, as if the reflection has decided to continue some gesture the body above has not yet made. The villager does not recoil. The whole village has moved beyond reflexive fear. Instead, the gaze deepens, and nearby witnesses follow it toward the water. Soon, several villagers are watching the same impossible thing. The reflection is moving alone. The lake surface remains unbroken. No ripple spreads. No breeze disturbs the mirrored tower or the reflected sky. And yet, within that clear stillness, the reflected figure gently raises the hand to the chest. The same gesture the real villager made much earlier in the square when the first silent ringing passed through. But above the water, the real figure stands quiet and unmoving. The reflection remembers, or perhaps it knows. A child at the shore blinks several times, then leans close to confirm the sight. An old woman folds her hands and nods once, as if some private expectation has finally been met. The baker looks from the figure above to the figure below and seems unable to decide which is the truer one. The bells continue behind them. The tower breathes. The held mourning remains unchanged. But in the lake, a second rhythm has begun. The reflected hand lowers. The reflected head lifts slightly. Then the reflected figure turns toward the reflected tower, while the real villager above continues to face the shore. The movement is graceful, not ghostly, not threatening. It carries the same calm as everything else the bells have brought. Several villagers instinctively check their own reflections. For a few moments they see only themselves, still and correct. Then one woman notices that the angle of her reflected shoulders is softer than the posture she holds above. child sees the reflected face smiling before the real one does. The lake is not merely mirroring now. It is revealing another layer of the village, one no longer bound to ordinary sequence. The first villager remains central to it. The reflected figure now takes one quiet step in the water's depth. Above, no step occurs. No sound marks the reflected movement, and yet it feels immensely significant, as though the village has discovered that the silent ringing does not stop at changing stone, time, and breath. It enters image itself. It gives reflection a life patient enough to wait for stillness before showing itself. The villagers gather a little closer to the shore. Still no one touches the water. The reflected figures continue small, independent motions, hands settling, heads turning, shoulders easing, as if the lake is allowing them to become slightly more complete than their waking forms above. The reflected tower seems older and wiser. The reflected bells more assured in their soundless arcs. The first villager watches the reflected self turn fully toward the tower below the surface. The real body remains facing forward. Between the two stands the silent morning, broad and unchanged. And within that held moment, once the villagers have seen the reflections move on their own, they cannot look away from the lake. The square remains behind them, the tower still breathing, the bells still moving in silence, but the water now draws every gaze with quiet authority. It has become clear that whatever the bells began in stone and air has found a deeper expression below the surface. The reflected figures continue their slow, independent motions. Nothing in them is hurried. Nothing asks to startle. The reflected first villager stands turned toward the reflected tower, hand once again resting over the heart. The reflected bells move with calm certainty. The reflected stone seems lit from within by a pale steadiness that the eye cannot fully name. Then something begins to rise. At first, it is difficult to tell whether this too belongs to reflection or to depth. Near the base of the reflected tower, where dark stone meets deeper water, a form gathers. Not a shape with sharp edge or creature-like outline. More a presence thickening gently out of the image itself. The villagers lean closer. Still no one touches the water. The lake remains perfectly smooth. No ripple marks the emergence. No widening rings pass over the surface. Nothing breaks, and yet the rising continues. It is as if a piece of the silent ringing has chosen visibility. A pale density lifts from below, moving upward with the same patient rhythm as the bells. It is not separate from the reflected village, but neither is it wholly part of it. The form carries familiarity without identity. It seems known before it can be seen clearly. The first villager kneels again near the shore. The real hand remains upon the knee. In the water, the reflected hand is lifted, and between them, the rising presence draws closer to the surface. The villagers feel the silent ringing intensify. Not louder, loudness has no meaning here, but more concentrated. The chest grows full. The skin cools slightly. Thoughts become slow and rounded, as though the whole village is being prepared to receive what is coming. The form rises further. It resembles, for one moment, the curve of a bell. Then, for another, the contour of a bowed head. Then simply light within shadow. It refuses any fixed description. Perhaps that is why no one fears it. The presence does not arrive with the hardness of object or demand. It arrives as continuation, as if something already deeply familiar has only now become visible enough to acknowledge. The dog in the lane comes to the water's edge and lies down again, calm as ever. A child rests against a parent's side. The baker removes a flower-marked cap and holds it against the chest. The old man with the walking stick lowers himself carefully to sit on a stone by the shore, eyes never leaving the lake. The form nears the surface. Still no ripple, still no sound. The reflection of the first villager does not step away from it. Instead, the reflected posture softens, as if welcoming it. The reflected tower behind it continues its silent breathing. The bells above and below remain aligned. Then the villagers understand that what rises is not emerging from beneath the water in the ordinary sense. It is emerging from the reflection itself, from the place where image became presence, from the same deep chamber where the bells found a way to ring without air. The surface holds. The form rises to meet it. The village waits, and within the unbroken skin of the lake, something approaches the boundary between the world above and the deeper, listening world below, without disturbing either one. The rising presence reaches the underside of the surface and stops there, not pressed flat like a reflection, not fully emerged like something entering the air. It rests in the thinness between water and world, suspended within the same impossible calm that has held the village since dawn. The lake remains perfectly smooth. The bells continue their silent arcs. The tower breathes with patient steadiness. The villagers gather around the shore in complete attention. There is now a space that should not exist, a space between two worlds. The reflected first villager stands below, hand lifted. The real first villager kneels above, hand resting near the water's edge. Between the two, just beneath the surface, the rising presence holds itself in quiet suspension, neither breaking through nor retreating. The silent ringing deepens. The villagers feel it more clearly than ever before. It no longer moves through them as a passing wave. It surrounds them like a chamber, a round, spacious silence in which every breath, every glance, every small motion feels included in a larger and gentler pattern. The first villager slowly lifts a hand toward the surface. No one tells the figure to stop. No one encourages it forward. The whole village has learned by now that these movements belong to the morning itself and must be allowed to find their own measure. The hand pauses an inch above the water. Below, the reflected hand rises to meet it. The presence between them brightens, not with visible light exactly, but with clarity. Its contour becomes more assured. Though still impossible to define, it now feels undeniably relational, as if it exists not on its own, but in answer to both hands reaching across the boundary. The surface remains unbroken. No ripple forms beneath the hovering fingers. No drop clings to skin. And yet the villagers sense that the distance has become thinner than sight can explain. The child by the shore leans forward and is gently held back by a parent, not from fear, but to preserve the stillness. The baker kneels on one knee without noticing. The old man's eyes fill with tears that do not fall. The dog keeps its head on its paws and watches the meeting point as if it has all the time in the world. The bells continue behind them. Above the water, the real tower remains silent and old. Below, the reflected tower seems younger and more complete. The two are joined now by this strange, breathing pause at the surface, where the village can feel both realities touching without collapse. The first villager lowers the hand another fraction. Below, the reflected hand rises another fraction. Between them, the presence holds, as though protecting the final distance, not forbidding contact, preparing it. The villagers all feel that too. This is not separation as denial. It is separation as meaning. The space matters. The waiting matters. The thinness between the two worlds has become the most alive place in the village. No sound marks it. No wind passes. No time moves forward. There is only the still lake, the hovering hand, the answering reflection, the presence between, and the bells continuing their impossible ringing over both. The calm remains. Nothing has broken. Nothing has returned to what it once was. And yet, something has changed again. Not in form, not in movement, but in the way everything exists together. The village still rests beneath the tower. The lake still lies beside it. The houses stand where they have always been. And yet, the space between everything has softened. The path no longer feels separate from the ground it rests upon. The shadow beneath the tower no longer feels distinct from the light around it. Even the distance between the villagers begins to lose its meaning. They stand where they are, but they no longer feel apart. The air itself has changed, not heavier, not lighter, but wider, as if the space between every object has opened, quietly, gently, without effort. The first villager stands among the others, no longer at the center, no longer different. The moment that once passed through them has now settled into everyone equally. No one leads, no one follows, no one waits. Everything simply exists together. The bells hang above, still, unmoving, and yet the ringing remains. Not from the tower, not from the sky, but from everywhere at once. It does not travel. It does not begin. It does not end. It simply exists within everything. The houses no longer feel like structures placed in space. They feel like part of a single form, one that includes the ground, the air, the lake, and the sky. The villagers feel the same. Not separate figures, but part of the same quiet presence. Even the lake has changed. It no longer feels like something beside the village. It feels like something within it. The reflection remains, but it no longer appears as another world. It feels like the same world, seen without distance. The surface holds still, perfectly, endlessly. The tower remains, but it no longer feels like the center. There is no center now, no edge, no boundary, only a continuous space that holds everything equally. The silence deepens, but it does not press. It does not surround. It does not isolate. It supports, gently, completely. The villagers breathe, and the breath feels shared, not taken individually, not released individually, but part of something larger, a slow, steady rhythm that belongs to everything at once. No one notices when it begins. No one notices when it ends, because it does neither. It simply continues. The world no longer feels structured, feels whole. The idea of distance fades. The idea of separation fades. Everything rests within the same quiet presence. The bells remain still, but the ringing does not stop, because it no longer belongs to them. It belongs to everything. And as Silver Lake rests within this endless, gentle calm, the village no longer feels like a place, but like a single, continuous moment, without edges, without distance, without anything that needs to be apart. The calm does not fade. It deepens, not in a way that can be seen, not in a way that can be measured, but in a way that softens everything even further, as if the world itself has begun to settle into a quieter and more complete state of being. The village remains, the tower stands, the lake rests, the houses hold their place, and yet, everything now feels connected by something that was not there before, or perhaps something that was always there, but never fully noticed. The breath begins to change. First, it is subtle, so quiet that no one would think to observe it, and yet, it is there. The air does not move like wind. It does not pass through the village in currents or waves. Instead, it expands, gently, softly, as if the entire space itself is breathing. The villagers do not inhale. They do not exhale. Not in the way they once did. Their breath no longer feels separate from the air around them. Feels shared, as if each breath belongs not to a single body, but to everything at once. The expansion continues. The air widens. The space between the houses becomes softer. The distance between one villager and another becomes less certain. Not because they move closer, but because distance itself begins to lose its meaning. The tower breathes, not in movement, not in sound, but in presence. The stone seems to hold a quiet rhythm, a slow and steady expansion, followed by a gentle return. The lake follows, though its surface remains still perfectly still. There is a sense that it rises and falls in harmony with everything else. No ripple appears, no wave forms, and yet the breath is there, felt deeply. The villagers begin to notice it, not with thought, not with words, but with feeling, a shared rhythm, one that does not begin with them and does not end with them. The first villager stands among the others, no longer marked by what happened before, no longer different, now simply part of the same quiet movement, a slow expansion, a soft return, again and again, but without repetition, because it does not repeat, continues. The ground feels different, not shifting, not unstable, but alive in a quiet way, as if it supports everything while also being part of the same breath. The sky rests above, but it no longer feels distant, feels near, as if it exists within the same space, not above it. The light remains soft, even, unchanging. It does not move across the village. It rests, just as everything else does. The silence remains, but now it feels fuller, not empty, not quiet in the absence of sound, but quiet in the presence of everything. The breath holds it all together. Every house, every stone, every villager, every part of the lake, every part of the sky. Nothing exists outside of it. Nothing moves beyond it. Everything is carried within it, gently, endlessly. The villagers no longer feel the need to move, no need to speak, no need to act, because nothing is missing, nothing is waiting. Everything already exists. The breath continues, not rising, not falling, and yet everything remains within it. The village does not move. The tower stands as it always has. The lake rests without ripple. The houses remain gently placed within the quiet space. And yet, nothing feels separate anymore. What once existed as many things now feels like one. The ground no longer supports the village. It belongs to it. The sky no longer stretches above. It exists within the same presence. The lake no longer rests beside the village. It is part of the same quiet whole. The villagers remain where they are, but they no longer feel like separate figures. They feel connected, not by sight, not by distance, but by something deeper, something that cannot be seen, something that does not need to be understood. The breath holds everything together, not as something outside, not as something surrounding, but as something within. Each villager feels it, not as air, but as presence, a calm that does not move, yet never becomes still. The first villager stands quietly, no longer marked, no longer different, simply part of the same shared state. Nothing leads, nothing follows, nothing waits. Everything simply is. The tower remains, its stone unchanged, the shape familiar, and yet it no longer feels like the center, because there is no center. The bells hang above, still, unmoving, and yet the ringing continues, not from them, but through everything. The sound that cannot be heard has become the structure of the world itself. The houses feel softer, not fading, but blending. The edges between them and the ground become less certain. The light rests across everything, even unbroken. It does not come from anywhere. It does not go anywhere. It simply exists. The lake holds its surface, perfectly calm, and yet it no longer reflects, not in the way it once did, because there is no distance left to reflect. Everything exists within the same space. The villagers no longer feel the need to move. Movement would not change anything, because nothing is missing. Nothing is incomplete. Everything is already here. The silence remains, but it is no longer something that surrounds. It is something everything rests within. It supports, it holds, connects. The breath continues, not in cycles, not in rhythm, but as something endless, something that does not begin, something that does not end. The world no longer feels like a place, feels like a state, presence, a quiet unity where nothing stands apart. And as Silver Lake rests within this complete and gentle calm, everything is held together, not by force, not by structure, but by a stillness that never breaks and never needs to change. The calm remains, nothing moves, nothing needs to, and yet everything becomes softer. The village does not change in shape. The tower still stands. The lake still rests. The houses remain where they have always been. But the way they exist begins to shift gently, almost without being noticed. The edges of things soften, not disappearing, not fading away, but becoming less important. The lines that once defined the village begin to blur. The ground and the path feel the same. The air and the sky feel the same. The lake and the space around it feel the same. Everything blends, slowly, naturally, without force. The villagers remain, but they no longer feel like figures standing in a place. They feel like part of the same quiet presence. Each one calm, each one still, each one fully held within the same endless state. The breath continues, but it no longer feels like movement. It feels like something constant, something that does not rise, something that does not fall, something that simply exists everywhere. The tower remains, but it no longer stands above anything. It belongs to everything. The bells hang above, unmoving, silent, and yet the ringing remains, not as a sound, not as a rhythm, but as something deeper, something that exists within everything at once. The light softens. It does not shine. It does not fade. It simply rests, evenly, gently, without direction. The lake no longer reflects in the way it once did, because there is nothing separate to reflect. Everything exists within the same space. The surface remains still, but the idea of surface begins to fade. The villagers no longer feel time. No before, no after, no movement from one moment to the next. Only this, only now, only a quiet state that does not change. The houses feel lighter, not lifting, not floating, but free from weight. The ground feels the same. The sky feels near. The air feels full, not with something added, but with something always present. The silence deepens, but it is no longer silence in the way it once was. It is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of everything. Nothing interrupts it. Nothing breaks it. Nothing needs to. The world feels like a dream, but not a fragile one. Not something that will end. Something stable. Something complete. something that does not need to change to continue. The villagers rest within it. The tower rests within it. The lake rests within it. Everything rests within it, and nothing exists outside of it. The dream does not fade, because it is no longer separate from reality. It is reality, and as Silver Lake remains within this soft, endless state, there is nothing left to follow, nothing left to become, only a quiet presence that continues without ever needing to end. The calm remains, nothing moves, nothing needs to, and yet everything becomes softer. The village does not change in shape. The tower still stands. The lake still rests. The houses remain where they have always been. But the way they exist begins to shift gently, almost without being noticed. The edges of things soften, not disappearing, not fading away, but becoming less important. The lines that once defined the village begin to blur. The ground and the path feel the same. The air and the sky feel the same. The lake and the space around it feel the same. Everything blends, slowly, naturally, without force. The villagers remain, but they no longer feel like figures standing in a place. They feel like part of the same quiet presence. Each one calm, each one still, each one fully held within the same endless state. The breath continues, but it no longer feels like movement. It feels like something constant, something that does not rise, something that does not fall, something that simply exists everywhere. The tower remains, but it no longer stands above anything. It belongs to everything. The bells hang above, unmoving, silent, and yet the ringing remains, not as a sound, not as a rhythm, but as something deeper, something that exists within everything at once. The light softens. It does not shine. It does not fade. It simply rests, evenly, gently, without direction. The lake no longer reflects in the way it once did, because there is nothing separate to reflect. Everything exists within the same space. The surface remains still, but the idea of surface begins to fade. The villagers no longer feel time. No before, no after, no movement from one moment to the next. Only this, only now, only a quiet state that does not change. The houses feel lighter, not lifting, not floating, but free from weight. The ground feels the same. The sky feels near. The air feels full, not with something added, but with something always present. The silence deepens, but it is no longer silence in the way it once was. It is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of everything. Nothing interrupts it. Nothing breaks it. Nothing needs to. The world feels like a dream, but not a fragile one. Not something that will end. Something stable. Something complete. Something that does not need to change to continue. The villagers rest within it. The tower rests within it. The lake rests within it. Everything rests within it, and nothing exists outside of it. The dream does not fade, because it is no longer separate from reality. It is reality, and as Silver Lake remains within this soft, endless state, there is nothing left to follow, nothing left to become, only a quiet presence that continues without ever needing to end. The stillness deepens, so gently, so slowly, that it cannot be followed. Nothing changes, and yet everything becomes quieter. The village remains. The tower stands. The lake rests. The houses exist. The villagers remain where they are. But all of it feels further away now. Not distant, not fading, but softer, as if the world itself has moved beyond the need to be clearly seen. The edges continue to dissolve, not disappearing, but becoming less important. The forms of the houses blur slightly. The shapes of the villagers soften. The line between the ground and the air begins to fade. Everything exists without needing to be defined. The breath remains, but it no longer feels like breath. It feels like something deeper, something that exists beneath movement, beneath time, beneath thought itself. The villagers no longer think, not because thought has stopped, but because it is no longer needed. There is nothing to decide, nothing to question, nothing to understand. Everything simply is. The tower remains, but it no longer feels like something that stands. It feels like something that belongs to everything else. The bells hang above, still, unmoving, and yet their ringing continues, not as something that moves, not as something that can be followed, but as something that exists everywhere at once. The light remains, but it is no longer light in the way it once was. It does not shine. It does not spread. It simply exists, soft, even, endless. The lake no longer feels like water. It feels like presence, a quiet depth that exists within everything. The idea of above and below disappears. The idea of near and far fades. Everything exists in the same place, the same moment, the same state. The silence remains, but now it feels deeper than silence, because there is nothing left that could disturb it, nothing left that could break it, nothing left that could change it. The villagers remain, but they no longer feel like bodies. They feel like awareness, quiet, endless, without boundary. The world no longer feels like a place. It feels like something beneath everything, a quiet layer where nothing needs to happen, where nothing needs to change, where nothing needs to exist in any particular way. The breath continues, but it no longer belongs to the body. It belongs to everything. And as Silver Lake rests within this deeper, quieter place, the world becomes something else, something beyond form, something beyond thought, something that holds everything without needing to hold anything at all. Quiet place, beneath everything, where nothing remains except calm. The quiet remains, and yet, even it begins to soften, not fading, not disappearing, but becoming something that no longer needs to exist. The village is still there, the tower, the lake, the houses, the villagers. Nothing has been removed, nothing has been lost, and yet none of it feels separate anymore. None of it feels defined. The shapes continue to dissolve, not vanishing, but becoming unnecessary. The outline of the tower is no longer clear. The houses no longer feel like structures. The villagers no longer feel like bodies. Everything exists without needing to be seen. The breath remains, but it no longer feels like something that holds, because there is nothing left to hold. Everything already exists without effort. The idea of space fades. There is no distance, no direction, no position. The lake no longer feels like a place. It does not exist below. It does not exist beside. It simply exists as part of everything else. The sky no longer stretches. The ground no longer supports. The air no longer surrounds. All of it has become the same quiet presence. The bells remain, but they are no longer above. They are no longer separate. Their ringing continues, but it is no longer something that moves. It is something that is endless, still, complete. The silence remains, and yet it no longer feels like silence, because silence only exists when something could make sound. And now nothing needs to, nothing moves, Nothing changes, nothing begins, nothing ends. Even the idea of stillness begins to fade, because stillness only exists when movement is possible. And now, movement has no meaning. The villagers remain, but they no longer feel like something that exists within the world. They feel like the same presence as everything else. No boundary, no separation, no difference. The world no longer feels like something that can be observed. It feels like something that simply is, without needing to be seen, without needing to be known, without needing to be anything at all. The light remains, but it is no longer light. It does not shine. It does not rest. It simply exists without needing to exist. Everything has become quiet, not silent, not still, but beyond both, a place where nothing needs to happen, where nothing needs to remain, where nothing needs to be understood. And as Silver Lake rests within this endless, formless calm, there is nothing left to follow, nothing left to hold, nothing left to become, only a quiet presence where even silence fades. The calm remains, nothing breaks it, nothing disturbs it, and yet something begins to return, not suddenly, not clearly, but softly, as if the world itself remembers how to take shape again. First, there is almost nothing, only the same quiet presence, the same endless calm, the same gentle stillness that no longer needs to be held. And then something shifts, not movement, not sound, but a sense, a faint suggestion that something exists within the calm. The village does not appear. It becomes slightly more noticeable. The shapes of the houses begin to form, not clearly, not fully, but enough to be felt. Soft outlines, gentle presence. The tower returns, not standing, not rising, but resting within the space, as if it has always been there, waiting to be seen again. The bells remain, still, unmoving, but their presence is felt once more. The ringing remains, but now it feels quieter, further away, as if it no longer fills everything, but gently rests within it. The lake returns, not as water, not as reflection, but as a calm depth, a presence that holds the village without separating anything. The villagers return, not as bodies, not as figures, but as soft forms, quiet shapes within the same endless calm. They do not move, they do not act, they simply exist. The light returns, not shining, not spreading, but resting, soft, even, gentle. The breath remains, but now it feels slightly different, not deeper, not stronger, but more noticeable, as if the world has gently remembered it. The space between things begins to exist again, but it remains soft, unclear, without edge, without boundary. The ground returns, but it does not feel solid. The sky returns, but it does not feel distant. Everything remains within the same quiet state. The silence continues, but it feels lighter now, less deep, less endless, still calm, still gentle, but closer. The world does not wake. It does not return to what it once was. It simply becomes slightly more visible. The shapes settle, the presence remains, the calm continues, and as Silver Lake rests within this gentle return, the world does not leave the dream. It remains within it, but now with form, with softness, with quiet presence that continues without ever breaking the calm. The calm remains, unbroken, gentle, endless, and yet something continues to return, not quickly, not suddenly, but slowly, as if the world itself remembers how to exist, one quiet layer at a time. The village becomes clearer, not fully, not sharply, but enough to be recognized. The shapes of the houses settle into place. Their forms are soft, their edges still blurred, but no longer uncertain. They do not stand apart from the space around them. They feel as though they belong to it, as though they have always been part of the same calm presence that holds everything together. The tower becomes more visible. The height can be felt again. The shape becomes easier to follow. And yet, it does not feel separate from the village. It does not rise above. It rests within. The bells remain still, hanging quietly in their place. No movement, no sound, and yet, the feeling of their ringing remains, softer now, more distant, but still present, like a memory that does not fade. The lake becomes clearer. Its surface begins to feel like a surface again, not reflective in the way it once was, but holding a quiet sense of depth that can now be felt more easily. The boundary between water and air begins to return, but it remains soft, uncertain, gentle. The villagers return, not suddenly, not fully, but gradually. Their forms become more defined, their presence more noticeable, and yet they remain calm, still, connected. They do not move, they do not act, they simply exist within the same quiet world that is slowly forming around them. The light settles, it does not shine, it does not move, but it becomes clearer, more present, more even. It rests across the village without direction, without source, without change. The breath remains, but now it can be felt again, not as something separate, not as something individual, but as something shared, a quiet rhythm that belongs to everything at once. The space between things begins to return. The distance between one house and another becomes slightly more clear. The path begins to feel like a path again. The ground feels more certain, and yet a nothing becomes rigid. Nothing becomes sharp. Everything remains soft. Everything remains gentle. The sky returns, not distant, not above, but present, a quiet openness that rests across everything. The mountains in the distance begin to form, faint at first, then slightly clearer, still soft, still calm, but present. The world does not fully return. It does not become what it once was. It becomes something else, something quieter, something more complete. The silence remains, but it no longer feels endless. It feels calm, present, held within everything. The ringing of the bells remains, but it no longer fills the entire world. It rests within it, soft, gentle, like something that no longer needs to be heard to exist. The villagers stand within this returning world, and though their forms are clearer, though the space is more defined, though the shapes have settled, nothing feels separate, nothing feels distant.